Good evening or good afternoon to those of us not on the East Coast. I'm David Keeve. I'm the president of EDF Action. We're the advocacy partner of the Environmental Defense Fund. I think everyone who's with us today or watching out there online or streaming is here for a couple of simple reasons. I think folks are upset about the actions that we've seen taken by the Trump administration in the first less than 2 months of his having been president for a second time. The intentional effort to sow chaos and the harm that is being inflicted across this country. And like me, I think a lot of our EDF Action members are trying to make sense of it and ask themselves, what can we do in this moment? I don't have all of the answers, but I'm really, really excited to bring on our special guest, who I think may not have all of them either, but has a lot more than I do. Gina McCarthy was the 13th administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. She was the first ever White House National Climate Advisor. She's also someone who is a former boss of mine who still talks to me, which might be the most remarkable thing of all. She is, as you'll find out, someone who takes her work and the protection of our environment, the delivery of clean air and clean water, and clean energy to the American people exceptionally seriously, but doesn't take herself seriously. I can't think of a better guest in this moment to have on than Gina McCarthy, and I can't think of anything more tedious than listening to a really long wind-up and introduction of you. So I've probably gone on too long, but just welcome, Gina. We're delighted to have you. It's truly an honor, and we're all looking to you for a little bit of guidance and answers. So thank you for being here.
That's great to be here, David. It's not the best day in the world for all of us, but we got to deal with it, right?
We do. Well, speaking of some of the best days, when you were in the White House, just how much progress, thanks to your leadership and others and President Biden, were we able to make over the last 4 years?
Well, it was a really fun opportunity for me to be in the White House. I want to caveat that by saying nothing was more fun than being at EPA. I loved it. But the White House was a really great stop for me. But I went there because President Biden called and he asked me if I would be his new White House climate advisor. And the team we had was great. I mean, Alizier and others were just phenomenal. And the whole goal of that, one of the reasons that attracted me to saying yes was not just because he asked, which is a good reason, but it was because, he talked about it as an opportunity to grow jobs again, to stimulate the economy, to bring health benefits to communities that really needed it. And it was all those variety of benefits that I loved, because it wasn't just about talking about greenhouse gases. It was really making the progress we needed to make in a way that was characterized as personal as we could get it to be done. And that's what, to me, was so exciting. I think that's why I believe we had enormous success in moving the ball on clean energy as a real competitive force against, continued escalation of fossil fuel production. And so I think we did really well. I know we actually engaged all kinds of states and organizations and Democrats and Republican districts. They were all out doing great press hits about all the great stuff that they delivered, which is exactly what you want to have, which is, what ended up being multi-billions of dollars to invest in clean energy all throughout the United States. And the interesting thing is, it wasn't just lots and lots of new jobs, but it was also opportunities in communities that had been left behind, like our environmental justice communities. And how do we finally get them the resources that they deserve? And it ended up being, I think, a really great opportunity to show that clean energy can really save money for families. It can really grow the kind of jobs we need to be competitive internationally. So I'm really proud of the bipartisan infrastructure law. I'm really proud of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was mine to deliver, and it happened, and it was great. And I think it continues to actually provide lots of opportunities moving forward. That's what I think you see at EPA, is someone trying to figure out how to undermine all that and do it in a way that I think will be unsuccessful, highly so.
Well, hundreds of billions of dollars in private sector investment, creating hundreds of thousands of good paying jobs and leading to lower energy bills for the American people. President Trump, he should just let all of his stuff run its course and he gets to take the credit for it, right? But is that what he's done so far in the first 2 months of office? Not even.
He has decided who his friends are. I mean, that was very clear. And this is all about MAGA. This is all about, him and his crazy little colleagues, trying to figure out how to undermine our government and, frankly, our democracy. He is just trying to build an autocracy. And that's what he's doing. I think it's pretty clear, and he's doing it, in order to benefit just the folks that he has been nurturing over the past 4 to 8 years. And that is all the fossil fuel guys, all the big industries that think that if they can eliminate some of the regulations and rulemakings, that they can benefit most from the future. I don't agree with them, and I don't think that that's what's playing out. It's amazing how little that this president, the current president, talks about what's happening in the real world as much as he fantasizes about what he thinks. And it's amazing to see that clean energy is continuing to be such a big factor. It would tick him off if he could figure it out and talk about it.
What are you seeing? How does this compare to the last time Donald Trump was president? And then related, what impacts will all of these actions have? Because you've been really clear that all that your focus has always been about one thing. It's not been about the planet. It's been about the people who live on it. What impact will the Trump actions have on the American people?
I don't know. Frankly, his first administration was so heavily about COVID. If you can remember all that stuff, there was very little that he did that was worth noting, other than to deny a lot of the health issues that the rest of us were facing. So it was a disruptive time. He did nothing to help the American people to feel better about where they were and that there was a path forward. It was only in the transition to Biden that I think people began to see hope at the end of this hideous tunnel. And so so I can't recall much that he did that was notable. And this administration is very different. He obviously, with Elon Musk and a cast of all the characters that he's been hanging out with, he was very clear on what he wanted to do. And I think in the end, he's been more successful than I would certainly like to see, in terms of actually advancing fossil fuel interests at the expense of the rest of us. But he hasn't succeeded particularly in dismantling the clean energy economy. But most recently, I think this, and we'll probably get to this, is what he's doing at US EPA is despicable. And it could give him real opportunity to the fossil fuel industry, which is, obviously what this is all about, because that's their friends. They hang out with the MAGA team, and the fossil fuel industry hangs out wherever they can benefit. And so it's very challenging right now, I think, but not without hope and opportunity.
Excellent. Well, let's drill down a little bit more to focus in a little bit more on what's happening at EPA, given your deep expertise and the fact that you are one of the few former administrators of EPA. But I know you've raised your voice alongside others, including Republicans, to speak out about what's
Yeah.
been going on recently. But that yesterday was a particularly stark day.
Yeah.
Um, can you talk a little bit in plain terms, as you always do, about the endangerment finding and
Sure.
why an effort to try to remove it is such a radical thing that goes beyond what Trump even attempted to do the last time he was
Sure.
president?
Sure, but first of all, let me just publicly thank both Christy Todd Whitman and Bill Riley. We did an op-ed on behalf of EPA that I think turned out to be a pretty powerful statement. And honestly, there are many Republicans that I just wish they had more courage to stand up and believed that in themselves a little bit better, because I do think there's a number of them, and I know 21 of them have already stood up and sent a letter, signing a letter to Congress saying they want to save the Inflation Reduction Act. I think that's a pretty big deal, especially when the margins for success on both sides are so small. So I'm excited about that. But what EPA did really yesterday and announced was really a disastrous step forward for EPA that really is all about identifying 31 different rulemakings, some that go back to what you mentioned, the endangerment finding, which was in 2009. I had some brown hair then. This was a long time ago. And the endangerment finding was all about, does greenhouse gas emissions endanger health and well-being? And that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, which wasn't particularly friendly then and certainly isn't now, they abided by that. They said yes. And on the basis of that, EPA was able to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. Without the endangerment finding, turning that around would diminish all of EPA's ability to factor in greenhouse gas emissions, the costs associated with that, and to effectively regulate greenhouse gas emissions in any rulemaking. So it would be a startling problem for EPA, but it's also a startling problem based on the science, because the science has only gotten more and more clear. And I think we are seeing some bit of a break in the Supreme Court now in terms of their willingness to basically ignore, I shouldn't say that, their willingness to interpret these decisions in a way that is favorable to the Republicans. This is now, I think, shifting appreciably in a way that might allow us to have a Supreme Court that is much better and more informed and takes action based on the science and data. So I'm thinking that there's more to this that we can do together. There's more to this that we can talk about in terms of benefits. And hopefully that will help provide some additional stability at EPA with some of the decisions they have to make. But to be honest with you, I'm really concerned about this administrator at EPA in his interpretation of what reconsider means, which in the normal context of our world at EPA and beyond, it means that unless you go back to square one and start rethinking for a few years, that rule is still in place and that rule still must be implemented. My fear is that he's going to decide that his reconsideration is all about stopping the implementation of these rules and handing the fossil fuel industry a lot more opportunities.
Gosh. Well, I know we've only got a few more minutes left with you, but I generally care a lot more about what somebody does than what they say. But
Yeah,
I'd like to talk for a minute or two about some of the rhetoric that Administrator Zeldin used yesterday, because it
yeah,
was really alarming.
it was.
Um, he described the core mission of the EPA as to be, quote, to relieve the economy of unnecessary bureaucratic burdens that drive up costs for American consumers. And then he went to describe the endangerment finding as he said he wanted to drive a stake through the heart of the climate change religion. I
Yeah.
never heard you talk that way when you were administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Can you react to some of that rhetoric and some of that language and that description of what EPA's core mission is?
I agree with you. It's really startling. I don't think anyone that holds a political position like the administrator of EPA should be um, basically free to say everything that's on their mind. And instead, they should do their best to enhance the mission of the agency and move it forward. Using terms like that brings in religion, like this is a religious exercise, and talking about it with the callous disregard that he talks about is just, it's outrageous. It's diminishing the leadership at EPA. I'm sure much of it was intended not just to help his fossil fuel friends in the mega constituency, but it was also about, informing the EPA about who their leader is, what their expectations should be of him. And I'm sure that it must have, as everything that's going on at EPA, it must have totally demoralized them, because when you are either when you're a public servant, you got to act like one. You've got to speak like one. You've got to care about the communities that you're supposed to serve. Nothing that he said gave me any indication that he either knew anything about what EPA did, knew about the rules that are being reconsidered, knew about the process that you need for reconsideration, or understood the real mission and the tremendous value of public service. That none of that came through. It was a bitter, angry swipe, I think, at not just the agency, but I think at everything that the agency stands for.
That point about the staff input is such an important one. And I'm proud of everything that we do at EDF Action and the Environmental Defense Fund does. But I'm really glad that our friends at the Environmental Protection Network, who stick up for the alumni of EPA and are standing up for the current staffers, including the great many career staffers who are there and trying to do hard work, or are there doing their jobs. But
David, can I just, before, I know that we're running out, but I just want to thank EDF and EDF Action. You have no idea how important it is to stand up right now and be counted. And I've always been able to know that EDF is standing up. And EDF Action is enormously important. We cannot just sit and bemoan what was said. We have to stand up and act. And we have to inform people, go to communities, get advocacy organizations out there, collaborate, coordinate, hammer out all of the messages that we need to deliver. Because we cannot just let this administration or this EPA grab the airways. We have to own it.
that's so well put. And we look forward to doing it together. Just not right now, because I know you've got to run. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's really been a pleasure and an honor. And you've provided such a great perspective to all of our members out there. So thank you, Gina. Really
Thanks for
appreciate
everything
it.
everybody's doing.
Wow. Well, that was super fun for me to interview one of my former bosses. Really, really honored to have former EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy and former first ever head of the Climate Policy Office and National Climate Advisor with us to put all of this in perspective. I can't think of anyone better to do it. I can't think of anybody better to lead us through the next section, going a little bit more in a sort of organized way through the challenges and threats that we're facing than my friend and colleague Reggie Peros, EDF Action Senior Director of Campaigns and Partnerships. So Reggie, look forward to welcoming you in and turning the reins over to you.
Thanks so much, David. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about how our regulatory rollbacks are under attack. I think the Trump administration is clearly showing early on that protecting Americans from pollution is low on their priority list, and that is going to cost your wallet, your health, and your safety. Trump wasted no time in his first few days in office putting in motion the agenda he promised oil executives during the campaign. For every new regulation put in place, federal agencies must get rid of at least 10 regulations already on the books. And unfortunately, that's not the worst of it. Yesterday, EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin announced he's going to undo dozens of America's most successful environmental safeguards. Safeguards that have helped Americans save money, saved lives, and protected millions from severe health problems, and launched thousands of new U.S. manufacturing jobs. Let's be clear, Zeldin's plan is a polluter's wish list. He is planning to gut limits on toxic pollution from fossil fuel power plants, coal plants that cause brain damage in babies, and tailpipes from new cars and trucks. He also plans to roll back cost-effective limits on methane pollution from the oil and gas sector, and the National Health-Based Standard for soot, which causes lung disease, asthma attacks, and heart attacks. Perhaps most dangerous is his plan to roll back the EPA's endangerment finding, the critical determination that Administrator McCarthy just talked about, that climate pollution harms human health and welfare. He is essentially telling Americans that climate change isn't a problem and that the federal government should have no role in trying to limit the pollution that it is causing. This determination was required by Congress in the Clean Air Act, has been affirmed by the Supreme Court multiple times, and is built on a mountain of scientific evidence. At a time when we can see that climate change is causing more extreme weather and worsening disasters, cutting the foundation of all our progress to fight climate pollution is just reckless. In terms of what comes next, I want to start by making it clear that the actions of this administration are meant to cause overwhelm and chaos. That is part of their goal. They want you to feel a bit helpless to fight back. But I'm here to reassure you. We have agency and power, and we need to stay laser focused on using our collective voices to fight back against this reckless agenda. If this administration uses the normal process to cut these safeguards, and honestly, who knows if they will, then we will need your help during the public comment process for each of these regulations to tell Administrator Zeldin that these repeals are dangerous and will leave all Americans worse off. But even before the public comment process begins for these regulations, we can use your help, and we'll get to that action later this evening. Now I'd like to move on and talk about some of the proposed budget cuts and mass firings that are putting essential government functions at risk. As you've probably heard, the Trump administration is currently on a spree to illegally decimate the federal workforce. You'll remember that Russ Vought, one of the key architects of Project 2025, and now the director of one of the most powerful offices in the federal government, the Office of Management and Budget, said he wanted to put public servants in trauma, and that we want them not to want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villain. Just as we foresaw, this mission is becoming a reality. Back in February, the EPA announced that it had fired nearly 400 staff and placed nearly 200 additional staff on administrative leave. And Administrator Zeldin has said that the agency can afford to cut 65% of their budget, including more layoffs. Just this week, he announced that he is shuttering all offices related to environmental justice and civil rights, leading to at least 200 more environmental experts losing their jobs. At NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which provides Americans with weather forecasts, extreme weather alerts, hurricane projections, and access to sustainable seafood, the story isn't much different. A few weeks ago, the administration laid off nearly 900 people, and reports as of yesterday suggest the agency is imminently planning to lay off another 1,000. Additionally, today was the deadline for all federal agencies to submit to the White House their plans for carrying out mass layoffs across the federal government. To call these illegal firings chaotic would be being generous. These layoffs and the complete elimination of some federal agencies are intended to hurt Americans and put our democracy at great risk. Fortunately, the courts are taking notice. As recently as a few hours ago, a federal judge ruled that the mass firing of probationary employees from 6 federal agencies was illegal. We know that these firings are going to continue, and it's our responsibility to support the public servants who have been let go, those still in government service, and raise our voice to express our complete outrage at these illegal attacks on a functioning government for the people.
Oh, I see my face again, so I'm supposed to talk. Thank you, Reggie. We know that President Trump and many in Congress are determined to eliminate the incentives that have already started delivering cheaper, reliable, American-made energy and good family-supporting jobs around the country. Can you share a little bit about what's next on that front?
Absolutely. So Congress is in the thick of their process to craft legislation using the budget reconciliation tool to pass a number of President Trump's priorities. As a reminder, the budget reconciliation process is a unique way of passing legislation that only requires a simple majority in both chambers. The policy is limited, though, and it can only be used to pass things that primarily have a budgetary purpose, so grants, taxes, those types of items. This is the tool that Democrats use to pass the Inflation Reduction Act. A number of Republicans want to repeal the energy tax credits, many of which had been in law for years, but updated with the Inflation Reduction Act, for things like clean electricity investment and production, electric vehicles, the manufacturing of batteries, EV charging infrastructure, electric trucks, and other technologies. Importantly, earlier this week, a letter was sent by 21 House Republicans to the head of the House's Tax Writing Committee, urging them to protect these energy tax credits. These members, led by Congressman Garbarino from New York, argued that these tax credits are important for business certainty and to prevent consumer electricity prices from increasing. It was great to see this letter, because right now is when the tax policy details are being written. The next few weeks will be critically important to make sure that members of Congress know that the energy tax credits are bringing important benefits to communities across the country, and that they must be protected in any reconciliation bill that Congress ultimately advances. We know that these tax credits and investments are benefiting communities across the country. For example, the Environmental Defense Fund released a report in January that showed how there have been almost $200 billion in announced private sector investment in EV manufacturing and batteries in the last decade. This has led to nearly 195,000 new U.S. EV-related jobs, many of which are in red states and congressional districts. A recent report from the Clean Energy Buyers Association found that repealing the clean electricity investment and production tax credits would raise average U.S. residential electricity prices by nearly 7% by 2026, equating to an average yearly increase of more than $110 for the average American residential customer. Now is an important moment to make a difference. You can use your voice by urging your members of Congress to protect these pivotal energy tax credits.
Hey, I'm back. Thank you, Reggie, for that overview. We covered quite a bit of information tonight. We talked about the regulatory rollbacks, proposed budget cuts that would harm our ability to act on climate, and the attacks on clean energy, and the uncertain future of the clean energy tax credits, which is too bad because, as Gina McCarthy shared with us, they are working. What can people do? I've been sort of browsing through the chat during your presentation, and that seems to be the thrust of a lot of the questions that we've had. Although at the very end, we're going to go through and address some of them specifically in more of a lightning round. But like at this time when there seems to be so much chaos, I think a lot of folks, including a lot of our members, are asking, can my voice actually make a difference? Can you walk through a couple of places where it specifically can?
Absolutely. And raising your voice right now is probably the most pivotal thing that you can do to make a difference. First, we encourage you to tell Congress to defend jobs in the economy and to preserve the clean energy tax credits. Earlier, we discussed the important role of agencies like EPA and NOAA in protecting our health. If EPA reverses its finding that greenhouse gas pollution is dangerous and that the EPA must take action to reduce it, we could see numerous protections rolled back at a time when climate disasters and extreme weather are endangering communities across the country. It means less protection against climate disasters, and it also means less clean air for all of us to breathe. We also talked about eliminating the clean energy investments on the economy and how that might increase your power bill. Eliminating these popular bipartisan tax credits would sacrifice jobs and economic growth to foreign countries, increasing energy volatility, meaning more money to power your home every month. Fortunately, there's still time to act. You can send a message to your representatives right now, asking them to protect these clean energy tax credits and protect American jobs in manufacturing. We'll take a moment now to let people send a message.
I'd say be dialing, but it's actually be typing. Thank you to everyone who is taking a moment right now to send a message to their member of Congress and senators. It's really easy, but it's really, really important. So thank you for doing that. Reggie, do we want to talk? I see that it's popped into the chat. There's another petition that's in there encouraging folks to tell Congress to protect the EPA's endangerment finding, which we've spent a bunch of time this evening talking about. Do you want to talk a little bit about that one too? And then we'll take some questions from some of our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. If the EPA reverses its finding that greenhouse gas pollution is dangerous, we could see numerous protections rolled back at a time when, like we said earlier, climate disasters and extreme weather events are endangering communities around the country. It means less protection against these climate disasters, and it also means less clean air for all of us to breathe. So if you're interested, you can also take a moment now to tell Congress to protect the EPA's endangerment finding that is at risk of rollback.
Terrific. Reggie, what do you say? Should we try to handle some of the questions in the chat? Do a little lightning round here?
I think that sounds great.
Awesome. A lot of folks have asked, what can I do? We've offered a couple of suggestions about ways that we as EDF Action members can raise our voice together. I want to just give a shout out and acknowledge a couple of the comments in the chat and questions. I think I'm saying this right. DMF in PA, that's DMF initials in PA, presumably in Pennsylvania, says, and electricity rates have already gone up substantially the past 3 months, at least in the East. That's exactly right. These policies that President Trump and his administration are supporting and foisting upon folks aren't lowering costs for anybody, especially costs on energy. They're making all of our lives more expensive, not less. Ahead of the election, whether you voted for Donald Trump or did not, as I didn't, it was very clear that the people who did vote for him voted for him because they were uneasy with the economy and wanted prices to go down. Now it seems that we're on the brink of a recession again. I think speaking up really, really clearly about the economic harms being caused, in addition to the climate harms being caused by some of these actions, is really, really important. I don't want to be glib about this next question because it's really, really important. Gary Gombe asked, where does the erasure of environmental justice from the EPA that's eliminating whole departments and staff en masse from the Environmental Protection Agency leave marginalized communities' ability to defend themselves against pollution problems? It doesn't leave anybody any safer. Just as all of the tumult around air traffic controllers and the buyout offered to if everyone in the federal civil workforce, including every air traffic controller, would just quit their job, they'd be paid out until September, which was almost certainly illegal and it almost achieved its goal of causing chaos. That didn't make any flyers safer in this country. Removing entire environmental justice offices isn't going to bring environmental justice to any community. A thing that I'm especially particularly worried about as well is the removal of scientists and the removal of air monitoring. It's one thing for this administration to talk about how they have a mandate to do away with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and quote unquote woke government. It's another thing to get rid of all of the tracking of how we measure what communities are subject to harm and which are not. And I think that speaks to our need to raise our voices as well, to speak up not just for ourselves, but for other communities that have borne the brunt of pollution for entirely too long. The announcements yesterday out of EPA were really, really alarming and really disconcerting to me, and caused me to wake up this morning and ask myself, like, what can I do? John Knox says, if you were to go around the country and ask people about these moves, no more than a small fraction of them of people would actually support them or even know about them. That makes your voice all the more important. The more you raise it, the better off we will all be. I have a question that I want to kick to Reggie, because I've been answering the questions as I read them, probably going on too much, and I know we're almost at the end. But Fran asks, can we distinguish the vote being taken today on the budget and the reconciliation process, which I think is voted on later, with a bunch of question marks, meaning she really wants to know the answer to this? So Reggie, help Fran and the rest of us out.
Yeah, absolutely, Fran. So the vote that was being taken today is about funding the federal government through September. Every year, Congress goes through what's called the appropriations process, and that is to decide basically the overall funding for the federal government for the next fiscal year. Congress at the end of last year punted this decision to basically today and tomorrow, and now they're having to deal with the consequences of that punting and determine how much funding that federal agencies will actually get in sort of their day-to-day operating funds for the next several months through the end of the fiscal year. The budget reconciliation process is a little bit of a different process. This is where Congress can make decisions on sort of large-scale funding decisions. They can make decisions about programs like Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. And this is where they can actually make tax decisions as well. And so it's through this process that Democrats in the last administration were able to pass the Inflation Reduction Act and make sort of large-scale investments in some of these critical programs that help limit pollution and protect our safety against climate change. And now Republicans are going to use that process to extend the Trump tax cuts and eliminate some of the programs that we all care about. What's really important about the budget reconciliation process is that in Congress, it requires less votes to become law. So any other vote in the Senate, such as the one being talked about today to fund the federal government for the next year, usually requires at least 60 senators to vote in favor of it. Under the budget reconciliation process, only 50 senators are required. And so the threshold for getting enough support to enact those bills into law is a lot smaller.
Thanks, Reggie. I'm going to ask you to answer one more question, and then it's to me as the sort of MC, for better or for worse, of this to wrap us up and say a couple of thank yous. Early on in the program, Frame 8 pointed out that they're a filmmaker from the New York City area and asked how they can get more involved in this cause in their area. To all of us, talking about these policies can sound sort of abstract and a little removed from folks' day-to-day lives. Maybe the most important thing that we can all do, in addition to raising our voice collectively via some of the petitions and other things that we've done, is put faces and stories together of real harm being caused. To the degree that you're out in your community and talking to folks who are going to see their lives measurably impacted by these cuts and these changes, you probably have a better sense than any of the rest of us do as a professional filmmaker of how to help to tell that story. Capture some of those stories, share them with us. We'll lift them up on our platforms. You share them with your friends. We'll all share them with our friends. And we'll do a better job of connecting faces and stories to these actions that our government is taking in spite of the fact that nobody asked them to do it. So I'm really, really grateful to Gina McCarthy for joining us earlier this evening. I'm grateful to my colleague Reggie for helping us all to make some sense of all of this. But mostly I'm grateful to every one of you who took time out of your busy days, your afternoon or evening to be with us, to learn a little bit more and to be in community and to think about how we can take action together. So thank you to all of our incredible EDF Action members out there for joining us this evening. We hope you're leaving a little bit better informed, but also aware of the power of your own voice. So thanks so much.